Now, I venture to guess that most of you have probably heard this parable before. In fact, it's one of the most familiar parables alongside the parable of the prodigal son. Now, because I assume that most people have heard this parable before, I'm going today to be focusing on a specific part of this parable. I want you to start by thinking. Think about a time when a stranger generously gave you an unexpected, no strings attached gift. So generous was that gift that it would have been shocking to you, especially because it came from a person that you do not know and most likely will never ever see again. Now, I don't know if you were fortunate to have one of these experiences. I happen to have such an experience, and to this day, I am forever changed and blessed, and ultimately incredibly humbled by the love that was given by that kind of gift. It occurred on a mission travel seminar that I had taken with fellow seminary students to Central America, a kind of reverse mission trip where we were going to listen to stories in several countries. And when we reached Nicaragua, we visited the poorest of the poor living on the edge of the city's garbage dump. And after spending the morning at that squatting compound with the poorest of the poor, the women welcomed us to have a homemade lunch. Now, it was a hot day, sweltering in fact, and I am ashamed to say that we turned our noses up when they placed down a strange-looking soup. It had bones and chicken feet and pieces of the bird's meat. It sat in a very clear broth with no vegetables. And again, it was a sweltering day, not a day when I would want soup. The women had set down the bowls and they left to get some fresh bread. And our tour guide used that moment, a teachable moment, to explain that there was a gift on that table and perhaps we didn't understand. He said, "They have given to you all they had. For don't you see there are no chickens running around this courtyard? The chickens that they used to make that soup before you on this hot summer day is in fact the chickens that they would have tended and kept for their own Christmas dinner. Had you not come to visit, that would have been their holiday feast in the months ahead. But instead, they gave to you, strangers who they will meet this one time, the very best that they had to offer. And certainly, they proved to me and to my fellow seminarians love that day. And I am forever changed by their generosity and their faithful example." Jesus lifts up a lesson about proving love to a stranger, sharing the parable of the Good Samaritan about giving compassion to the mugged person lying in the ditch. And that story clarifies that neighborly love extends far beyond physical, geographical, and social proximity. For it is not about who is neighbor or whom must I love. Rather, it is about how we love an other, known or unknown, through compassionate extensions of mercy and compassion for all people in all circumstances, especially strangers in our midst, with that outpouring of non-discriminatory love. This point is underlined by the recalling that the Samaritan are the bitter enemies of the Jews, for they descended from those intermarriages between Jews and the northern kingdom and the colonists brought by the Assyrian conquerors. Not to mention that one of the greatest points of hostility between the Samaritans and the Jews was the dispute over where the correct location was for proper worship, the temple in Jerusalem or the temple at Mount Gerizim. In a nutshell, there was bad blood for certain between these two groups, Jews and Samaritans. Just think of it as likened to the feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys. It would have shocked the listener. Did I hear him correctly? Who helped? Stunned and perplexed, the audience would have to consider these three people who came across that man in the ditch. And like the lawyer, consider, well, who manifested compassion when the rubber hit the road, when they saw that great need? Who treated the mugged victim in the ways that proclaimed you are loved? That answer is of utmost importance when we come to this parable. It is key. Who proved love? We know the answer. We've heard this parable before. The ones who passed by the need, well, they fell short. They failed in giving loving kindness to the person that needed it that day. We've heard this. And we know that the Samaritan actually gave love that went far beyond a Band-Aid fix. And this is where I want you to specifically consider that love beyond a Band-Aid fix. The Samaritan gave care that extended beyond the immediate cleaning of a wound with oil and wine, beyond just bandaging up that person. The Samaritan went an extra mile, for sure, by putting that person on the donkey and taking them to the inn, and then, in fact, took care of them. That meant they stayed, and then went on to pay the bill in advance, not just in full, promising to come back and taking care of any remaining part of that bill. It demonstrates for all who hear that parable that providing love is linked to tangible, compassionate actions that the Good Samaritan offered with no strings attached. Compassion, Neil Plantinga says, springs up from the genuine distress over another person's suffering, accompanied by that firm desire to relieve that suffering, and then to actually relieve it if it is possible. Scholar Amy Jill Levine adds, compassion involves a gut-level emotional response to another's hurt. In fact, translating that verb that we get about offering and responding in pity in our translations in Hebrew, there is this understanding that what happened in that moment was so intense that it was coming from compassion, springing from the gut level response, an emotional response. The Hebrew tells us that language that we miss in our translation, it is emotional response to another's hurt so intense that if we were to remain in inaction, we would get a stomach ache because it should come from the gut, that ability to help that person, that need to help that person. Then we couldn't pass by. Frederick Buechner wrote that our religion is about deeply felt passion, but more than that, passion that is harnessed. The power that stirs the heart must become the power that stirs the hands and feet, because it is the places your feet take you to and the work you find for your hands that finally proclaims who you are and who Christ is, he says. It's in those actions that we show love to another. And this sermon series, as we conclude after 3 weeks, today we focus on what does it mean to love those that are strangers. Loving the stranger is an act that pushes us past what is convenient and familiar and comfortable to us. It means seeking to care for the person who stands far outside our social circles, living beyond our zip codes, and that might share nothing in common with us. Loving the stranger capitalizes on a chance meeting to give glory back to God by responding to the other's immediate need with heartfelt kindness that Christ would be proud of. It's an example of loving another for love's sake, pure and simple. Loving the stranger stands before us as a way that we can say you were always already loved, and proclaims at the same time that you are not forgotten. For as one scholar noted, the man in the ditch reminds us all what it feels like to be forgotten by others. Jesus reveals the expectation that we are to be people who run toward making a difference instead of fleeing or being numb to it. For those who pass by the man in the ditch is also a reminder that that kind of inaction is, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote, that the sin of respectable people is the fleeing from responsibility. Instead, we should be, as scholar Barbara Essex states, we are to be a people that meet the needs before us, because she notes that Jesus shows us how disciples should live, keeping God in the center and doing all the things because we love one another. And that makes a good foundation for being a Christian, is that deliberate choice that ought to shape what we do in the world, that we do not render service for a reward in return. We do not help others so that we can have our 15 minutes of fame. We serve others because we are grateful to God who loves, cares for, and watches over us. We're reminded that life is not just about us. It's about God and what God is up to in the world and in us. It is about what God is calling us to be and to do for the sake of God's realm here and now. The parable of the Good Samaritan demonstrates that there is a difference between being responsible to a person versus being responsible for a person. Now let me explain. There is a distinction. In the book, The Art of Neighboring, the author shares this point regarding this distinction in those two little words, to and for. It might seem like a small nuance, but actually the distinction constitutes a big difference in how we actually relate to people. Think of it this way. Being responsible to people, it means a healthy relationship. It means we then encounter them to love them, to encourage them, to bless them, to pray for them, to serve. But being responsible for people, well, that can quickly become sort of an unhealthy relationship, for in that case, it means that we can mistakenly take responsibility for their well-being, for their success, for their failure, for their happiness or for their unhappiness, and so on. Instead, we are responsible to God's vision, to love, to help, to bless. It is part of the way that we live into our calling as Christians, that we should live the Christian life that ushers in to have hope. It is a conduit through which God transforms the world. On December 18th, we have the opportunity as a congregation to love the stranger in our midst. At the Homeless Alliance, many are overlooked in our city, and they go there struggling to get their basic needs met. And we will gather there to share a holiday meal. Beyond a hot Christmas dinner, we want to be able to extend the kind of comfort that continues on into the future. We're providing new hoodies and thermal gloves and hats and puppy chow for their companion animals and so much more. And it causes me to wonder, what ways can we give that go beyond what is expected? Could we go beyond the need of purchasing just one hoodie and perhaps buy 4 or 6 or 10? Could we commit to purchasing the items for children who might not otherwise have a full Christmas stocking, so that they might find it stuffed full to the brim this year? Might we, like the women in Nicaragua who gave their Christmas dinner, their very best to strangers in the middle of the summer, might we then do the same this season to bless others in big, meaningful, humbling ways? Proclaiming in that faithful service to the stranger in our midst that you are loved. For in the moments like that, in those special, unique moments, even if we never see those people ever again, we can be part of something that is God-given, that springs from God. It's compassion that's freely given, and it enriches both ways. Like a ray of sunshine from God, it is the warmth of kind love that touches hearts, that changes lives, and reminds all people, especially those near the stranger, to them and to us, you are loved and you are not forgotten. Thanks be to God.